Hello everyone and welcome to our first International Women's Day webinar. My name is Tracy Duncan and on behalf of the team at Australian War Widows New South Wales, thank you so much for joining us. While everyone is logging in and getting settled, and before I hand over to our host and CEO, Renee Wilson, just some general housekeeping and announcements. We welcome any questions you may have. Please comment in the Q&A section and we hope to have some time at the end of the session to answer these. We'll also be recording this webinar and a link will be sent to all registered attendees in the coming days. So if you're unable to attend this event live or need to duck off early, you're still able to view the recording at your own convenience. Please stay connected with us socially on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn, where we provide updates on any upcoming events and keep you updated on what's happening in our space. Okay, I think we're now ready to get started. So good evening, Renee. I'll now hand over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for making the time to join us on this special occasion. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are all gathering today. I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to anyone with Indigenous heritage joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge all of those who have and continue to serve Australia as part of the Australian Defence Force, acknowledging in particular the families of the uniformed personnel for your commitment and sacrifices that allow our service personnel to preserve and protect a peaceful Australia. My name is Renee Wilson and I'm the CEO of Australian War Widows New South Wales. I am also the spouse of an Army veteran who was wounded during the Afghanistan War. I have worked for many years in policy development within the Commonwealth Government in areas such as people trafficking, anti-corruption, crime prevention, veterans affairs, and defence innovation. I have trained professionally as a lawyer and spent my early years working at the Crown Solicitor's Office in New South Wales. My focus since I was a child was always helping people and creating a world where there is fairness for many. Needless to say, I'm excited by today's conversation. Welcome to our webinar, this International Women's Day. Let's talk about equity, an important conversation about how we move the dial forward in achieving better outcomes for women and veterans' families. Before we kick off, being International Women's Day, I wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that at Australian War Widows New South Wales, we stand on the shoulders of a generation of incredible women who stood steadfast in their will and pursuit of a better future for war widows and veterans' families. Today, we recognise all of the women that have come before us, those that are next to us now, and those who are coming forward to help us achieve that vision. The role women play in all areas of the Defence Force, and at home as the primary carers, spouses, and mothers of veterans isn't well known. But we know, and we honour you. We thank you today and every day for what you do and what you have done and sacrificed on behalf of a grateful nation. So to the women standing in uniform, to the women standing next to someone in uniform, and to the women who have lost their loved one in uniform, you are our inspiration. Turning back now to our conversation on equity, we have a very experienced and diverse panel for you today. Collectively, their experience covers corporate, public, private, government, charitable sectors, and importantly includes the lived experience of war widows and veterans' families. So let me now take a moment to introduce them to you. First, we have Tricia Hobson. Tricia became the chair of the Australian War Widows New South Wales board in 2022, having served on the board since 2019. Tricia is a partner at law firm DLA Piper, working within the insurance sector for over 25 years. Tricia is globally recognised as an industry leader with extensive experience in claims, complex multi-party litigation, cross-border disputes and investigations. Tricia regularly advises boards, particularly in matters relating to ESG, diversity and inclusion. In addition to her legal practice, Tricia dedicates time giving back to the community through mentoring and coaching and non-executive directorships for non-for-profit organisations. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you very much, Renee, and it's a great honour to be here today. I echo everything that you said in your introduction, and might I say that it is my absolute great privilege and honour to be the chair of this great organisation, and I'm very thrilled to be here with my fellow panellists today to talk about this really important topic, so thank you.
Thanks, Tricia, that's beautiful. Next, let me introduce you to Queen. Queen is on the Board of Directors for Australian War Widows New South Wales, joining in 2020. Subsequent to her appointment to the board, she was elected President of Australian War Widows New South Wales in 2022. Since joining the board, Queen has served on the Finance, Risk and Audit Committee and the Investment Advisory Committee. Queen is a mother of 2 children, a professional in her own right, and a war widow. Welcome, Queen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Queen. Next, let me introduce you to Jennifer Collins AM. Jennifer is a director on the board of Australian War Widows New South Wales and held the position of chair from 2020 to 2022. Jennifer is also the current chair of the Kokoda Track Memorial Walkway in Sydney. Jennifer's career and experience covers health services, public sector and industry associations. Jennifer has previously held senior executive positions at the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Military Rehabilitation Compensation Commissions. Jennifer is a champion for female leaders, spouses and carers of veterans. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Renee. It's a pleasure to be here and I look forward to the discussions tonight.
Thanks, Jennifer. And finally, let me introduce you to Alex Garrick. Alex is the Deputy Chair of Animal Therapies and Executive Director at Fearless PTSD. Alex is also an author who recently published his fictional memoir, which documents internal challenges with mental illness and features influential women in his life. During his public sector career, Alex specialised in a wide variety of areas, including media relations, workplace relations reform, governance, national security policy, and defence personnel policy. Alex has also previously advised government ministers and worked as a Chief of Staff in the Rudd-Gillard governments. Alex is a long-time Army reservist, champion of women, and advocate on all matters affecting veterans and their families. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks very much, Renee. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to be here with you all this afternoon on International Women's Day.
Thanks, Alex. So as you all know, the theme for today's discussion is equity. And the simplest way to think about equity is to think of it in terms of achieving fairness. For example, this could be fairness in terms of accessing services and support, fairness in entitlement, or fairness in outcomes. By being equitable, we can be inclusive of everyone while recognising and catering for their uniqueness. Equity encourages a tailored approach to the delivery of policy and programs and services, which might make it a little bit more difficult to achieve, but it is not impossible. Equity is really important because, as we know, one size rarely fits all. So, with that in mind, Queen, I'd like to invite you to kick us off by sharing your views on why it's important for all of us to be thinking about equity.
Thank you, Renee. Equity is very much a base where we can all start and then tailor to everybody's needs, individual needs. My needs as a war widow, as a woman, as a mother, as a professional are a lot different, especially at this time in my life, than they were 5 years ago when I became a war widow, and they will be different in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, when I start facing challenges of my children growing up, moving away. So to me, equity is the understanding that we need to be able to meet people's needs based on what they require at that time. And the best way to do that is to actually ask them.
Really, a really good point, Queen. I think quite often we can assume that we know what people need, but it's so important that we're taking that time to engage. Jennifer, I wonder if you have anything to add to that around why it's important for all of us to be thinking about equity. You're on mute, Jennifer.
Oops, sorry. As you said before, it is about fairness. And I think that equity is a mean. I think the result should be equality. And I think that every person, regardless, male, female, where you live, should have access to better health, good education opportunities and economic opportunities. So for me, equity is about fairness and making sure that eventually we end up with equality right across the genders.
So equity as a means for equality. I like that. Tricia, what do you have to add to that? Why equity is important for all of us to be thinking about? And perhaps if you have something to add to the equity as a means to achieving equality.
Yeah, thanks, Renee and everybody else. I find this quite an interesting question to try to answer, because in my mind, it seems so simply obvious that how important equity is. And what I like about, and so trying to express why it's so important, it's almost sort of a no-brainer, but everything that's been said already in terms of fairness and justice and making sure that there is a level playing field for everybody. And we all have different experiences. And Jennifer's talked about the big things which really must be fair, education and health and things like this, but also having access to them and acknowledging where people come from and the limitations on them, being able to access them is incredibly important. My personal experience, of course, is more in the professional world and my own experience there. And you always draw on those personal experiences. And I think about the world of law, for example, which is a very privileged profession and world, less so now than it was 30 years ago when I started in it. But having come from parents who were both public school teachers, and my mother ultimately had no father after the First World War, and sort of this background, and I went to public school, coming into that privileged world of private school, the socioeconomic factors are very, what they call the sort of silent diversity issue. But I always felt like I came from a slightly different starting place. That's just a little example, but it's my personal example. And when you talk about equity being the road to equality, I think that's a really good point. I think the spotlight being on equity is really important this year, because diversity inclusion initiatives have always focused on equality as being part of it. But, this is about recognising not everybody's the same, understanding that, finding ways to understand it, and then importantly, finding ways to ensure that people are not disadvantaged by that, so that you can end up in an equality situation, which means providing the same to all, but it actually meaning that is meaningful, because it will actually make a difference to their lives.
Yeah, some really important points in there, Tricia. I will just highlight, I'm a public school kid too. So yay for the public schools.
Yes.
But it's quite a good tension that you just brought up. And I think we quite often, the conversations around International Women's Day focus, at that outcome of equality, but we're not actually looking at the road and the means to get there. So I think that's a really important theme that we've already been able to surface, and I'm keen to return to that throughout the conversation as well. Alex, what are your views on this particular question?
Yeah, mine's probably a little bit different. I actually think it's about the future of our country. We're living in a very rapidly changing environment. We've got stresses and strains coming upon our country, like every other country in the world, from all sorts of different angles, whether it's energy, whether it's financial, etc., or military. We need to maximise our potential. And the way that we do that is through equity of opportunity. And I think for a long time in Australia, particularly during my experience in the workforce, I've been very disappointed to see that there hasn't been that equity opportunity for women in particular, because there's consistently barriers put in front of them to achieve their personal success and their personal advancement. So as we talk tonight about this topic, I'm going to be focused very much on that issue about self-development, equity of opportunity for women, and how we achieve better success in our overall existence, national existence, through achieving that.
If I might dig into that question, or just your response a little bit there, Alex. What do you think gets in the way of equity and opportunity for women?
Yeah, sure. Look, as you pointed out in the introduction, in my public service career in particular, I managed a lot of women-dominated teams, and so I spent a lot of time mentoring women and talking about their aspirations. And I think the biggest thing for me, and why as you know, Renee, having worked for me, I really enjoyed having women work for me, and the main reason being is that I believe that they're very values-based in terms of their work. They are more emotionally intelligent than a lot of men, and they look at things from a different angle. So I always tried to maximise that potential. But the one thing that I would say about that is that because women play so many different roles in society, from a family perspective, from a work perspective, they don't get the opportunity to spend time on their own self-development as, say, men would be. And I had someone say to me once that women are not ambitious. And I thought, what a load of rubbish that is. Women are extremely ambitious, but women don't always get that opportunity. And I'll give you a great example. Several times during my career as a manager and as a leader, I had women who were on maternity leave who wanted to do a training course as part of their self-development, but the organisation turned around and said, no, you're on leave, so you've got no right to be on a training course. And I think that's the sort of barrier that I've seen consistently during my time. Now, it's getting better, but I still think that women face, for the virtue of the fact that they are very dedicated in doing a great job, as I said, very values-based, they always have other things involved as well. And I just don't think that the systems that we've got in place across our workplaces cater for that need to focus on self-development and potential for advancement.
I might, if I can, before I come back to you, Queen, with a more specific question around your lived experiences. But Tricia, if I can draw you in there, I don't have the stat in front of me, unfortunately, but I know that the legal profession is attracting more and more women. How are you seeing this play out in the legal and corporate sphere, and what those barriers might be?
So the statistics are interesting in law, and I think that every profession and business has its own tipping point. So in law, more than 50% of women are graduates and come into law firms. That stays roughly like that until you get to partnership, and then it drops. There's a cliff. Right. And so the average, Australia does a little bit better than the rest of the world, but globally, it's still sitting at something like 22% women partners. Now, how do you go from 50% to 22% on average globally? That, of course, is wrapped up in a lot of the issues that Alex was just talking about, and examining the fact that, and one of the big issues for law, for example, has been, how do you achieve equity for women so that they feel that they are on exactly the same playing field as men when they are going for partnership? And of course, a lot of women, by the time they get to that point, have had children. Many have, not all, but some have, many have, and they've taken time out. They haven't just gone ahead on a linear path like many of their male colleagues have. And of days gone by, that was simply dismissed as just, well, you're just behind in years. You don't have as much experience. That's changing. I've got to say, there is a lot of good initiatives now in relation to making sure that women are not disadvantaged in that way, and that the playing field is leveled up in a very equitable way. But this goes to the heart of what Alex is also saying about this being such an important issue for our country, for our business world, every aspect of it. Our businesses are all made up of people. That's it. And so people bringing their best and authentic self to their work and feeling like they have got the same opportunity as anyone next to them, no matter how and who they are, how they dress, what ethnicity they are, all of those diversity factors. As long as they can feel that, the business benefits, because you get healthy, happier, more productive people in your business. And so everybody thrives and benefits from it. And our people sit across every aspect of our businesses. And so it goes to the heart of culture, it goes to the heart of everything. And so that I know this might sound ridiculous, but I went to a Harry Styles concert on Saturday, and can I just say,
doesn't sound ridiculous at all. I think everyone is going.
It was wonderful. But the reason I raise that in this context is I was looking at the crowd, and it was a crowd of the most young, diverse crowd, people being who they are, who they want to be. And I looked around, and all I could think was, God, we're really, you know, as business leaders, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're building structures and institutions that now adapt so these people can continue to be exactly who they want to be all the way through their careers, but always have every opportunity that everybody else does have. And that's how important equity is.
Yeah, can I just add a bit there too?
Of course, please do.
Some of the research that I've read, it says that businesses that have 30% of women in their leadership role are 15% more profitable than others. So, and by having women in those roles, the Australian economy actually would grow by another 11%. So I think when you take that into context, that data, which is not very often used, and I'll come back to that a bit later, but it does say to you the evidence is already there. The evidence is saying X, Y, Z, but there doesn't appear to be the motivation to actually, bring women into those roles, given what Tricia said about, rearing children and so on. So while it's good to have the narratives around that, I think we need to start to put it into context for people so they understand how important it is from an economic point of view.
I feel equity is a choice, and women should not be punished for choices that they make. If we decide to have children or not have children, if we come from different cultures or different backgrounds, we are stronger because of our experiences, not weaker. We actually add value to a business because of the choices we make, and we should not have to be punished for that or be less or seen as less or treated as less because of choices that we make.
Quite often, I think the conversation around International Women's Day focuses on how do we lift the tide, which for me really comes back to the theme here. And I think where we're all getting to is if when we are focused on equity and opportunity and equity generally, that enables us to start actually lifting the tide. And Tricia, I can't imagine the joy that must have been at that Harry Styles concert with people just being able to be who they are. And it's liberating.
I will add that I was there with my girlfriend and her 12-year-old daughter, so I had a
It's good to know for when my daughter turns 12, she can go with you. Okay, Queen, if I may, I think you mentioned it before. You mentioned the how when we're not needs-based, we can end up with quite a standard approach. And I think I just wanted to find out from your perspective, you are in a very standardized system when it comes to veteran services and entitlements, you and your children. And I'm wondering how that standardized approach that may not actually may not take care of your needs, may not result in equitable outcomes, how that's impacting you.
It's a big impact on my life. My needs at the moment and my children's needs are not being met, not because of the department as such, but it's just that we've got a whole new cadre of people that are coming through that their needs are a lot different than when War Widows were a force back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So the needs for us is a lot different. There hasn't been a flexibility in the system built in to be able to pivot and meet our needs. I can give you a simple example. When my husband passed away 5 years ago, one of the things that I was able to access was some help with the garden. I lived in a townhouse that had no gardens. But I needed childcare and I needed tutoring for my children because the trauma of living through their dad's death impacted their education. I couldn't get any help at all in regards to who do I seek, who do I go to be able to say, I need this help, I don't need that help. It was like, oh, you get a gardener. Well, yeah, but I don't need a gardener, I need a tutor. And the system has not been built to be able to pivot and actually meet my needs and my family's needs, because it has not reflected or been able to you know, that it's made up of people, but it's also got a lot of red tape into it, so it impacts on how I interact with the system, and that affects everything to do with my life. And how then do I just ignore that system, go somewhere else? So the choices that I get are very limited then in how I move, because I had 3 jobs at the time that my husband passed away. I had a mortgage to pay, I had cost of living, I had grief counseling to go through. I wasn't able and responsive enough just because I was overwhelmed. And the system wasn't built to deal with my needs at that time, to be able to meet the requirements that I needed. So I struggled with just a system that just is across the board trying to be meeting everybody's needs. It wasn't. It was just tick in the box. And that wasn't what I needed.
Well, Queen, I am very sorry to hear that. I'm sorry that the system has lacked its agility to be able to respond, where, you know, don't need a gardener because you're in a townhouse, but can you pivot so that I can have the support where I need it? And I think, Tricia, it kind of builds into this next question that I have for you around, well, at least I hope it does, organizations and boards. When we're talking, you know, they can become quite standardized, they can become bogged down in process, and they can think that they know what their constituents or their charitable constituents need or are thinking about. What do they need to be thinking about in order to look at better achieving equity in how they're delivering their programs and services? And I think Queen's given us a beautiful example.
Yeah, you have, and Queen, you know, that's on my heart for you as well, because it's such a difficult time, and you're looking to an institution that's meant to help and support you, and it wasn't able to. And that for me raises a really very important point, I think, and that is around the fact that, you know, we all work within institutions, and institutions have been around for a very long time, and they're very male in, to speak bluntly, they're you know, very male in their formation, and for many decades or beyond, in terms of how they operated and their structures and their governance, and it's all design. And so when I started my career, you know, one thing about being around for a long time in your career is you sort of have watched the arc of our world and how it's changing. And I'm very heartened in the fact that we have this focus now, but it's only been for the last third of my career that we've really had this focus. And so I started, and you have a look at it, and there's a lot of deeply powerful institutions and with deeply embedded structures that they've got to unwind a lot of. And that's a hard thing to do in a very short space of time. And so I think the board world and the executive world, which are leading, and the leaders of the business and government and broader community, which cover everything we're talking about today, it is a real period of transition, and they've got a real responsibility on their shoulders to start to really look at whether the initiatives that are being put in place are really going to be effective. And one thing I think that's incredibly important is that they're either getting the information that they need to make sure that the initiatives are actually going to impact in the way that is most useful. For example, Queen, your example, you know, someone relevantly with the board, who senior management, that can make the difference, knowing that they need to adapt programs to fit the people who are in need, is so important. And that's the same wherever you are. I think that again, you know, it's particularly hard for boards because they sit quite in a position that is harder for them to dig right down deeply. But there's got to be ways for them to find out and look at their governance and look at their information that they're receiving and working with their management teams in order to make sure that whatever they've got in place to try to deal with issues of equity are going to be actually most effective. And they have to know their organisations really well to do that.
It's a really good point, Tricia, and it's something that was demonstrated through the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, when that exact question was being asked effectively by the commissioners to the then ministers. And they were really questioning it on the data that was being reported to make sure that the minister had the information that the minister needed in order to govern correctly. And I think what that commission has shown us is that the importance of that information flow, the importance of the relationship between the people in charge of the information and the people that need the information, and how do we get that moving better. Speaking of red tape and silos and information flow, I'm going to go now to Alex and Jennifer. And I just wondered, what can governments and departments do perhaps in order to better increase that flow so that we can achieve equity on the ground? And it's that difference between that high level policy idea and the change that we're seeking to make on the ground.
I might go first, Alex, that's all right? So, look, I think there's two things government can do. I alluded before about data. I think that the governments need to look at the data they have, and they start needing to use that data for marginalised groups so they understand what's going on, and making that data actually available to individuals and communities. Enable them to think about what the design of a program or what the policy impact might be on them. And another way they could do that is create those models, which is where governments provide greater opportunities for individuals and citizens to have a voice in creating policies and solution that impacts on that. There's been a lot of work done in this in Taiwan. And certainly when you look at when they've involved their citizens and individuals in designing programs or policies, there has been better outcomes for those communities. A plug here, I really hope the Voice to Parliament really brings home that involving the community in both the design and policy frameworks achieves and has a better impact on our Indigenous brothers and sisters than it has in the past. So I think data collection is really important. Let's use the data to inform program design and service delivery and policy settings, but involve the community and individuals in the development of that. And the second thing is have these co-creation models. For Queen, that absolutely would have been critical, and a whole group of her peers, if they were involved in actually developing the program that was going to deliver what they needed, not what a bureaucrat thought they needed or what a government thought they needed, but actually involve them in that development, design and program implementation, then I'm fairly confident the outcome for them and their families will be much better. But yes, a Voice for Parliament is a really good example of where if we involve the community, then the most marginal group in Australia will have a say in what program looks like, what service delivery looks like, and what policy impacts has on them. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, look, thank you. And look, I agree with you, Jennifer, that that issue around co-design is extremely important. I'll take a slightly different tack, Renee. By academia, I'm a historian, and one of the things that has always fascinated me has been the history of Australia's industrial relations system. And the industrial relations system has been, for up till probably the early 1990s, has been extremely male-focused. And that goes back to the initial judgment, what was called the Harvester Judgment back in 1907, which deemed that an honest wage was what a man would need to support his wife and 2 children. It was nothing about female workers. It was all about the male worker. And you would see over the next 100 years or whatever, how that system has devolved and changed. And when Jennifer will recall, she wasn't working at the time, but we both know that it was what, up to the late 1960s when in the public service, women were basically sacked if they were about to have a child. And when I first joined the public service in 1984, you had tea ladies. Most of the female workforce in my organisation were working in typing pools, and there was a clear delineation about what the system thought men should be doing and what women should be doing. Now, that changed quite a bit during the early 90s, and we're seeing, obviously, particularly in the public service, people, women doing a whole range of different roles, in particular getting into the senior executive service and so forth. So the system hasn't been very kind at all to how women are treated at work, and in particular, to get back to your initial question, I believe that there needs to be still further flexibility in workplace practices in terms of how we enable women to get better opportunities, as I spoke before. And this is really about workplace flexibility, more modern workplace practices. Now, we're getting there. A lot of organisations are doing so much better. But it also comes back down to what I call values-based policy as well. And we don't see enough of it in Australia. Jennifer mentioned the voice. That's one example where that will be the case. But having worked in politics, it's not about values, it's about a political outcome. And I think that what we need drastically in Australia is a change of focus within our political system that waters down into the public service in terms of what are the policies out there that are going to make Australia a fairer and more productive society. Now, before I hand on to the next speaker, I'll just use one example where this has been a huge capital F fail, and that's the robo-debt stuff. Now, you've seen with the robo-debt Royal Commission, just a complete failure of leadership, of values, of what was best for Australian society and Australian people. And we've got to get away from that type of policy development. We need to have a look at, as I said, what are the values that we as a country want to aspire to, and build our policies around that.
It's Alex, there's a lot in that, and I'm not going to open up the can of worms that is potentially there around, political terms, governing for strategy, not political outcomes. There's a lot in there, but I do want to go back to a point that Jennifer mentioned, where she talked about co-design, and she talked about it in its breadth. So she talked about it not only in its initial thinking and its design, but also in its implementation. And I just wondered, in your experience, Alex, where do you think we do the co-design and the implementation stuff very well?
No, I don't. And look, that's been as I said, I've been fortunate or unfortunate, whichever way you look at it, to be involved in different programs that have failed. And one of the things that I did was clean up the home insulation program, for example. But we don't do it well. And there's a reluctance to do it well, I think, because in some cases it's very hard to do. And it's hard to get people together to work effectively for the same outcome. And I think that's where I believe still so much more needs to be done around skilling people up in terms of how to work effectively in a co-design environment, but also being more flexible in terms of how policies are basically developed. So no, I don't. To answer your question, I think we've got a long way to go. And perhaps what Jennifer says is right, that the voice might be an initial template, I guess, for how we might do things in the future.
Jennifer, it looks like you wanted to add something to that conversation.
I did. It comes back to a bit what Alex was saying, is where there was in one certain department I worked for most recently, and no names mentioned, where I did develop a program which engaged a particular group of women around a particular supports and needs that were required. From my perspective and the women's perspective, it was very successful. However, with time and bureaucratic cuts, the program was wound back quite significantly, so that women like Queen didn't benefit from what was basically a co-created model using the people that were going to be impacted by it. And the program design was certainly very much include the end user, but with time that's deleted. And I think governments and bureaucrats try to change things. They don't actually look back and say, now, did that work? Why didn't that work? And what are some of the things that we can readjust or change to do that? Or actually ask the person, was that program quite beneficial for you? And what are the things we need to change? So I think even though we're saying that, we've moved on a fair bit, I think that there are still barriers from a bureaucratic point of view around programs being thrown out without considering, did that actually work?
Yeah.
I heard today, and I'm quite shocked by the results, that the Aboriginal babies that are born to Aboriginal women, their birth weight has actually dropped. It is actually worse off than it was 10 years ago. So which makes me think, now 10 years ago, from my recall, there was a program that was put in place that was about working with Indigenous women around with their babies around good nutrition. And I just wonder if those programs that were working at the time have, for whatever reason, been deleted. And governments are very good at funding trial programs or putting in programs for 4 years and then dropping them. So I think that there's an issue there too, Renee.
The political cycle strikes again. Trisha, I'd like to invite you into the conversation there and see if there's anything, given what you've heard, and where I guess what we're really talking to is the difference between that original intent being sort of watered down when we get to implementation. What do you think we can do to actually improve that status quo, to improve that disconnect from your perspective?
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
But listening to the co-design discussion has been really interesting because, it is really key. It's one thing. It's a step situation. I mean, first of all, you have to know what the problem is. Then you've got to get enough information in positions of influence to know what the problem is, and then you've got to make sure that you put the programs in place. But for them to be successful, they can't be imposed. We're in the middle of in the business world and the professional world, a real generational divide, I think, has never been as big as it is right now because of technology, because of that has made that much bigger than divides and sort of transitions in the past. And I certainly have seen my share of personal experience of where, law historically is a very hierarchical profession. And one of my former firms in a very senior position one of my suggestions was to put some young partners onto the global executive to help bring voices. And that was just a little bit too controversial at the time. The next was about trying to get a young board together to work with the senior board. And again, I think that's happening more now. But these were all kind of co-design type initiatives, understanding that if you don't do that, first of all, you're not going to get it right, to be frank. And secondly, you're not going to have the buy-in and the leaders in the generation that you need in order to make the difference in the programs. So that's a long way of saying very much agree with all that's been said. In terms of the political cycle, I have no solutions for that. So I'd be making a fortune as a consultant to everybody if I did. And it is endemic, not just here but around the world. And it is a major problem that we do have. And business world, not quite as much. But you do have your CEO tenure is getting shorter and shorter.
I hope that's not a sign. I'm joking.
No,
I'm joking.
Absolutely not. But if you look at the average, it's no longer really 10 or 12, being the norm as it used to be. Pressures of the job are very senior, but also that's part of the way business needs to regenerate a bit faster these days because of the shifting landscape. But again, that brings with it some similar risks about changes that can go. So I have no real answers, but do echo everything that Alex and Jennifer have said.
I don't know that there is an answer. to tell you the truth. And I think I know what it's like to ask a lawyer a question that there potentially is no answer to. But I think we're having a really important conversation. I think we're surfacing a lot of issues that, at least in my mind, are clarifying some of the pathways that I think might shift the dial forward a little bit. Jennifer, I'll come to you in a second. I just wanted to just invite the audience, if they wish, they can please, they can put in questions in the Q&A. We will keep this moving and flowing because I'm really, as you can see, quite intrigued and really into the conversation at the moment. But please do put them in there. If we can't get to them now, we will be able to send something back to you a little bit later, or we can invite our panelists to share their views on those. Queen, I just wanted to come to you for a second and invite you back into the conversation at this point, particularly when we're talking about that voice of different voices around a table, voices in particular of lived experience. How important is that to you, and how do you sit around a lot of tables now as president? How do you navigate what that entails for you?
To me, stepping up is important.
Yeah.
Understanding my audience.
Saying internet is unstable.
Understanding my audience, understanding the purpose of the table that I'm sitting at. What is it that we want to achieve? Having a vision. So that's very important, to actually have all that in mind every time I go into a meeting. What is it that I want? What is it that we're trying to do as an organization here, depending on whatever the organization is. Having women also step up. I mean, I'm just one voice, and I can talk on my needs, but I also need women to tell me what they want for me to advocate on. So open it up, be open to different point of views. I might not see it. I might not be able to interact with somebody else's needs, but I can take that and try to move that along so that we can get resolutions, be able to get women to, if they can't contact us via phone, via email, they can, there's technology. Technology has been a great gift in the sense that we've been able to reach people, and people have been able to reach us. So use everything that we have to try to actually advocate on needs-based. I can't, I'd love to say walk in somebody else's shoes to experience, and I don't wish anybody to have walked in my shoes because it's a really awful experience. But there are some experiences I've never lived, and I hope never to experience, but some people have. And if they are limited because of where they live in Australia, if they're too far away from city centres, if there's no departments or institutions in their region where they can actually reach, I would hope that they can actually talk to us, reach out to us, so that we can actually take that. But we need them stepping up.
We need to hear their voice.
We need to hear their voice. We need to hear their needs so that we can actually meet them. We can address them. We can actually give them solutions. Sometimes there might be solutions already available and they don't know about it. Educate them. So every time I go into a meeting, I hope that I take that with me so that I can actually be able to achieve the voices for women and achieve results for them.
Queen, I have to say, I think you do an incredible job of that. And I am going to offer Trisha the opportunity to have a cheeky plug here, because we do have a really diverse board at Australian War Widows. And Trisha, I just wanted, your views on that. You sit in the corporate world. How different is the Australian War Widows board and that real voice of lived experience around the table? On mute.
Sure, I've done to do that. It's been a real, I have to say, I don't know, eye-opener doesn't quite really reflect it, but it's been an incredibly rich experience for me, a learning experience, and as I said at the beginning, an honour. And that's because it's a real reflection, if we're just talking generally about diversity and gender perhaps today. Having members on the board that have lived these experiences, you and Queen, but many, and some of our older members, some of our members in particular over the last couple of years, you know, they come to the board table and they don't have the same preconceived ideas of what being on a board should be. The same fear that can come in a corporate world when you come and you're the new member. Should I say this? Shouldn't I say that? And so there is this slightly unfiltered version, but I think in a very positive way, because what you get is, even though we're all women except Stuart, we have a lot of diversity of backgrounds, of age, etc., within the board, and we get such a great. I just feel as a member and taking the chair after Jennifer's fantastic couple of years, hard seat to fill. It's a very enriching, and it shows the power of embracing all aspects of the diversity and what it can bring. So, you know, it's been terrific.
And I think for me, what I've seen is it really acts quite nicely as that check and balance. So we talked earlier about information flow in a really big sense, in a government department sense, in a political sense, but I would hope at least our information flow is quite good, because we have the diversity of question. We have people thinking at grassroots, we have people thinking sky high, and everywhere in between. And I think that is the, yes, it is a cheeky plug, but at the end of the day, it's actually a really good example of what we're talking about here: equity and opportunity.
Absolutely.
Trisha?
Absolutely. And just quickly, you know, like when we throw to one of the members who is very, very connected on the ground with her groups, and she's always able to bring that on the ground perspective that we can call for. So as you say, this great breadth. So it's terrific. Yeah.
I'm mindful of time. I don't want to stop the conversation, but I will have to start to wrap it up. I wanted to thank you all, because it was incredibly insightful to hear from you all. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. And I learned a lot from each and every one of you. There were little gems in everything that you said. I'm shortly going to ask you all one more question in order to really close the session, so you can have the final word and not me, though I will try. But before I do that, I just wanted to thank the audience for tuning in. This is something new for us, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I certainly have. I'd like to thank our team in the background, Carolyn and Tracy, for making this happen for all of us today, and for running our technology in the background as well. So my final question for all of you, Trisha, you're on mute.
There is one question in the chat.
Oh, there is too. I see that now. I see that now.
So I thought I might just raise it just in case you hadn't seen it.
Please do. Thank you.
So it's from Jennifer Delaney, and she says, our great use of technology can actually also be divisive, as the older generation struggle so much with that. The wonderful war widows of the previous generation need us younger ones often to listen, but from my experience, many are still out there that don't know that help is available. How could we move forward with finding those women and getting them the support they need? Now, I might hand to Renee to answer this, but can I say from the board's perspective, and Jennifer's nodding, and Queen will be too, we are so focused on finding the women and families that we need to help, and using technology, using whatever means we can. So it is a very good question, and I'm not sure whether Renee or Jennifer or Queen would like to step in to help answer.
Yeah, just only to build on what you have said, Trisha, the board has given me a very strong mandate. We know, for instance, just looking at War Widows, we know there are 15,000 in New South Wales alone, 40,000 nationwide. We want to know all of them. We want to meet them where we're at, which is what where they're at, which is what Queen had mentioned. And technology is a significant barrier, because we can't communicate with them as quickly and as easily. So we are looking at other ways in which we can, if we're coming to a regional centre, we can promote that we're in the area through local papers, through local news, in order to find the other widows and the other people connected to our community out there, so we can better understand them, as Queen said, better get to know their needs. It's also about delivering our services in ways in which can be quite different for different people. So our space is a really good example. what is our space? Our space is a different take on what has been our social and guild clubs. It's a way in which people like Queen, who run 2 jobs, run a household, and are incredibly time poor, may only get 5 minutes before they jump into bed for the night, can still connect with their peers because they can't attend monthly meetings. Going back to our guild and social clubs, we make sure that even those with mobility limitations can get there, and that they are safe. So it's really about adding diversity in delivery, in accessibility, and in programs and services across multiple channels. And I will talk for ages on that. So Jennifer, I hope that has answered your question a little bit. And I'm very happy to have another conversation with you about it, as well as to learn a bit more from you on that, to see what else we can be doing to make sure we're adding in diversity, not only in a people sense, but in a program and service sense as well. Thank you for that, Tricia. I hadn't quite seen that pop up. I was so busy and ready to ask my final question of you all, which I think that question from Jennifer actually works quite nicely, because my last question for you all is one thing that you can leave us with. What is one thing that I know what I've got to do now? What's one thing that we can do in our daily lives to help us achieve equity, no matter how big or how small? And Queen, I will start with you.
I would start with holding a conversation. Start talking to each other. We have lost the art of talking and conversation and actually speaking face to face, not through Zoom, not through a phone, not through an email. Start talking.
Yeah, that's
something simple,
incredibly simple and beautiful. Alex?
Yeah. Look, I would say have confidence in yourself. And one of the things that I found in mentoring many women, particularly many young women, was this reluctance of them to push themselves forward and to seek out that self-development that they desired. And my advice to it: look, you've got so many opportunities in the world now. Things are improving. There's still barriers, but have confidence in yourself and go out there and achieve what you want to achieve. I think that's the right of every person in Australia to do, regardless of their gender, but particularly with women. You've got the world at your feet now. Go out and grab it.
That's great advice, Alex. Jennifer?
Look, I actually took this a little bit different, if I may. I initially thought, well, maybe one of the things I could do is call out the poor behaviour, use social media, but I've actually thought about it a little bit deeper. I think what we need to, similar to what Queen said, I actually think we need to engage more with men and the decision makers and just have the discussions about why it's important around equity and equality, and why it's important, particularly around the impact on society. So I think my message, my action myself, will be to have much more discussions with the males of the world around why it's important around gender equality. So I think that would be my action, Renee. Tell Gary I'm going to give him a ring.
That sounds great.
Jennifer, can I just quickly add there that one of the things that I say to men, and was a theme of my book and other talks that I do, is that the only people that can make men treat women better are other men. And I really believe that conversation that you said is extremely important moving forward. And I get a little bit concerned that sometimes as we deal with a whole plethora of women issues, that there's a real disparity between men and women as they approach it. Good men and women need to get together to fix the problem. So I agree with what you said 100%.
It's a great book on that, but we're running out of time. Tricia?
Oh, just quickly on that point, I watched this great show recently where a BBC journalist was interviewing 7 Nobel Prize winners of the year. 1 woman, 6 men. She turned to the woman and said, right, what are you going to do now that you're the woman? And she just turned and looked at her and said, don't ask me that question. Ask the 6 other men who are here and have the ability to actually do something, because there's lots of them. It was a brilliant little exchange, and I thought summed it up beautifully. I took this question I took it a little bit more personal and a bit because I took it as, what can you actually literally do day by day? And I was thinking about it from my own little perspective and how small. One thing I try and do is try to learn whether it be daily or just a couple of times a week, I always try and learn something new about my team members' personal life so that I actually just understand them better, or my partners or whoever it is, so that I actually because that understanding and having the conversation, as Queen said, I think allows you to readjust your own behaviours and think about how you're actually applying equity in your own day-to-day. And the other side of it is I then look at the bigger, and I've been fortunate enough to have some incredible roles that have given me the privilege of speaking to so many women and understanding these issues so well, that personally I'm kind of looking for the I suppose the bigger, where I can maybe leverage experience. And so I'm very purposeful. And I think anyone that's had a privileged career and is at that point needs to be very purposeful about everything that they put their time and energy into. And for me, diversity, equity, inclusion is right at the top of the list as far as, when I speak on things, what I dedicate my time to in terms of committees. This organisation, I was drawn to it because it was begun by women for women, and very focused by women. So that's just the little and the bigger picture way that I personally look at it.
Thank you. And I'm supposed to be the neutral facilitator, but I will add my 2 cents into the end of this, because it kind of builds on, I guess, what everyone was saying. But importantly, what Tricia says is how do you, as an individual, bring this into your own practice, into day to day? And for me, what I do is I do it around inquiry, and it's more about it could be in myself. If I have a reaction to something or someone in my space during the day, I inquire into myself. Why is that? If I think that something's not fair, I inquire into that. Why is that? And just that one question, I think, helps to surface some of that thinking. It helps to be able to have the conversation and to be able to draw it up into something bigger. 6:02, I did go over time. My apologies to the panelists and to everyone online. However, I do really want to thank you once more for joining us, in particular to our panelists. You were all incredible, very insightful, and I think that you all came together really well as a panel. So thank you. We really appreciate your time this evening, and to everyone online, we appreciate your time as well. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you once more, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Bye.
Thank you.